Once upon a time, there was a very jovial but very poor innkeeper in Salamanca, which is on the west of Spain. He was so poor that he dressed in rags, and one day,
He's going to a meeting right next door.
okay. Oh, okay. One day, he's in the barn taking care of the guest animals, the horses and the mules and so forth. Now the archbishop had come by and was staying at his inn and had left his mule there. And his mule was decked out in a saddle of gold. And he had been, Tom, we're telling a story. The Enchanted Mule of Salamanca, which is on the east of Spain. I just started a moment ago. Once upon a time, there was an innkeeper who was very jovial and very, very poor, would go about his day just dressed in rags. Took care of the inn, and he also took care of the animals that people used to come to the inn, because it was the old days. And one day, he's taking care of the archbishop's mule. And he's amazed at how wonderfully decked out this mule is. It has a saddle totally made of gold. It's drinking wine. It's eating the finest cornbread, freshly milled from that town. So this innkeeper says, if only I were so lucky to be this mule. If only my dad had been an ass so that I could be a mule and I could be eating whenever I pleased and have lots of money. The mule says, are you sure? And the innkeeper's name is Pablo. Pablo says, yes, I'm very sure. The mule says, well, you know, the archbishop, he can be pretty big and pretty heavy to carry around sometimes. Pablo says, I don't care. Little strain would be worth it. I'd get all these riches and I'd be treated like royalty. The mule says, well, if you're really serious, just grab hold of both my ears and you can be the archbishop's mule. The mule says, you know, I was a person before anyway, but I didn't like, you know, I was not happy with my wife and she wouldn't let me go, so I decided that this would be the next best thing, right? So, but you're welcome to it, because I've decided that this time when I'm coming back to life, I'm coming back to something else. And my wife will never find me. So Pablo says, terrific. He grabs the mule's ears and poof, he is now a mule. The mule is now a monk. And Pablo is saying to the mule, he says, listen, could you get me a little more wine while you're at it? A little more of this fancy cornbread? The monk is like, see ya, talk to your hand. So now Pablo's hungry and he's in this stable and he's thinking, well, maybe it wasn't quite as good as I thought. And the longer he waits, the more he starts thinking, maybe I made a bad choice. Maybe I just spoke, you know, I was good as an innkeeper. So he decides that once the archbishop comes out, he's going to rush onto the street and he's going to go over to his mom's house. His mom is very devout, and he figures for sure his mom is going to pray for him to become her human son again. So, at long last, the archbishop comes out, and there's no innkeeper named Pablo to take care of the mule anymore, so the attendants take care of the mule. And they're not good at it. They've never done this before. So, fortunate for Pablo, though, because he goes running, racing, and everybody, whole town ends up chasing him because they're like, what happened? It's the archbishop's mule, and the archbishop needs him. Pablo could care less. He shows up on his mom's doorstep, and she had been weaving. She had been doing stuff with wool. And she's like, what is this strange mule at my doorstep? And she gets very scared. And Pablo, you know, he doesn't have lips or anything, I mean, to talk like a human. And so he's trying to tell her, listen, this is your son, but she doesn't know. And she's scared, so she whacks him on the head with this stuff that she's been working with. And he's like, whoa, but he just figures he'll show her that he's the son. So he trots into the house and tries to sit in her chairs and just destroys everything. Finally, the attendants have caught up. And they grab him and he's just, charging at them. He's rolling around in the dust. Finally, though, the attendants are just whacking him so hard that he says, okay, anything is better than this. So they take him out to the street. The archbishop was waiting there. And they get the archbishop on him, and Pablo's like, he is pretty heavy, but he does his best. He loves the archbishop. He's religious as well. And they start trotting along. And the archbishop is like, what happened to my mule? It's walking so funny. It walks like a camel now, where it's just, the legs aren't right. And Pablo's not used to walking like a mule, rather. So it takes him a while to get this. Meanwhile, the archbishop is just grabbing onto the harness for dear life. And some villagers are walking by. And they think because the archbishop is like this, that he's probably getting ready to bless them. So they're like, oh, archbishop. They get down. They're like, oh, they're waiting for their blessing. Meanwhile, the archbishop doesn't even notice what's going on. And he's just like, oh, hanging on. But Pablo the mule thinks that the villagers have decided, because he's all dressed up with his, saddle of gold and everything, he figures that they're paying homage to him. So he kneels down too. And then meanwhile, the archbishop topples off, falls on his head. The attendants come all around, and they're like, what happened to this mule? What's going on? And finally, they get the archbishop back on the mule. And meanwhile, the villagers leave. And they trot some more on. And they get to the village near Sevilla that they've been going to. They get to this big monastery, and the saddle glinting in the sun. The monks from the monastery see it from afar, and they go rushing out to greet the archbishop. And meanwhile, the archbishop is still struggling with this, and the mule, also known as Pablo, sees a big cross, big famous cross, and he rushes over to it. And meanwhile, the archbishop has fallen off by then, and he's like mesmerized by the cross. And the other monks are like, what is going on? Maybe the devil has caught hold of this mule. And so they're all rushing at the mule, and they're whacking the mule for all it's worth. And Pablo's like, oh my goodness, what have I gotten myself into? And out of the corner of his eye, he sees the monk that used to be the mule, that he now is. That monk comes over and he tells everybody to quiet down, and he starts whispering to Pablo. He says, are you sure? Maybe now you want to be a person too. And Pablo says, well, why would you want to be a mule again though? Because, why would anybody want to be a mule? And the monk says, well, my wife caught on to my disguise here, and she's just not having it. So I would way rather be the mule. I had a great life when I was a mule. So they swapped, and that was it. Everybody happily ever after. Archbishop got his old mule back. Pablo got his old life back as the poor innkeeper, glad to have it. And the mule, no longer the monk with the wife that was angry at him, was happy too.
That was entertaining. I couldn't stop laughing.
Thank you, Doc.